The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
3 years ago this month, most of us faced a global pandemic for the first time ever. I hate to ask this, but could avian flu be the next one? And if so, are we prepared? We'll explore that tonight. Then, how some of those good news stories about pandemic pets may now be the bad news stories about more animals being abandoned in public parks. Also, Aaron Kelly explains why Elon Musk's multi-billion-dollar purchase of Twitter isn't crazy, but rather solid gold. It's Thursday, March the 9th, and that's all ahead on the agenda. Before COVID-19, what are called zoonotic diseases were hardly the stuff of ordinary conversation. That changed, of course, as we all brushed up on how diseases in bats could or could not jump to humans. Similar questions have cropped up lately about the avian flu and whether we learned the lessons of the pandemic well enough to react quickly for the next time. To get some insight on that, we're joined in Guelph, Ontario by Cheyenne Sharif, professor and acting dean at the University of Guelph's Ontario Veterinary College. And here in the studio, Jason Nickerson, humanitarian advisor to Canada for Doctors Without Borders. Jason, good to see you again. Thanks for you flew in from Ottawa today, so we're grateful for that. Professor Sharif, nice to have you on the line from Guelph. Why don't you start, Professor Sharif, tell us, what do we know so far about the H5N1 bird flu outbreak?
So this particular strain of avian influenza virus came to Canada approximately 14 months ago in December of 2021. We first detected the virus in eastern Canada, and since December of 2021, this virus has spread to all of our provinces, and it has indeed crisscrossed the country twice over. So it can be found in many of our flocks, many of the in all of our provinces, and unfortunately, it has also begun adapting itself to mammalian species. Last year, it was primarily found in birds. Late last year, we began looking at some mammalian species that have contracted the virus, and it seems to be actually getting more and more adapted to mammals.
The most updated numbers I have here are as of February 23rd. They've got what is it here? 240 cases of human infection of H5N1 reported by the World Health Organization. Now, 240 cases is certainly not COVID-19 style numbers, but how concerned do you think we should be about a wider outbreak?
Well, any number of human cases that we detect is really disconcerting, because it does mean that the virus is gaining more momentum, is gaining more adaptability to humans and to mammalian species. So any numbers, in my opinion, is alarming. It's not actually too bad when you think about the previous outbreaks of H5N1 that we had in late 1990s and also in early 2000. Unfortunately, during those outbreaks, approximately 480 people died of H5N1. But like I said, any human morbidity or mortality is yet another alarm that would go off for public health policymakers and authorities, and also for us in the veterinary field.
Well, Jason, I guess we can't make this point strongly enough that this is very fatal, can be very fatal in humans. How well equipped do you think we are right now with vaccines or other ways to prevent transmission of this avian flu?
So I think there's a few important things to keep in mind. So first of all, this is a different scenario than we were in at the start of, say, COVID, where this was a novel virus that was emerging. That's not the case here. In fact, there are obviously influenza vaccines that exist. And in fact, there's antiviral therapeutics that also exist. So, we're starting with more knowledge of what this virus is and more about its epidemiology in animals and also in humans than we were with COVID-19. So That being said, it takes time to make sufficient numbers of influenza vaccines to be able to, vaccinate people if it's felt that, that becomes necessary. So, it does still take time to produce millions of doses of anything in the world. But as I say, we're starting with a bit of a technological advantage if we ever get to that point.
Well, more knowledge, but more fatigue as it relates to these issues as well. Does that concern you?
Yeah, I mean, no question. And I think also with the COVID pandemic, the world became much more acutely aware of the need for there to be equitable access to these medical tools. And we know that even with seasonal influenza vaccines, these are primarily being used in high-income countries, despite the fact that there are, of course, cases of influenza in low and middle-income countries. So, we need to be acutely aware of the fact that it's not just about producing vaccines and producing therapeutics, it's also about making sure that everybody who needs access to them is going to have access to them.
Professor Sharif, next angle on this story, I wonder how concerned you are about the risk of mutation each time a highly infectious kind of influenza visits us.
Well, unfortunately, COVID-19 has given us, or perhaps fortunately, it's given us a lot of lessons in terms of what we know about biology of viruses. And I would say with a lot of humility here, that we don't really know how these viruses are going to behave in the future. What we do know is that viruses, generally speaking, are quite unpredictable. So things could go in various different directions, and there is very limited amount of predictability in behavior of viruses. So as Jason has also pointed out, and I think that's a really critical point to hammer home here, we need to be prepared. This is not the time to panic, but this is the time to be prepared. Again, as Jason has correctly pointed out, it's not just a matter of producing a vaccine. It's a matter of producing a vaccine that is highly efficacious, that is highly safe, and can be deployed to a wide variety of populations in many geographical locations. So even though the risk for mutation of the virus may be low at this moment, for gaining capacity for transmission to humans or to poultry or other animal species, we have to be ready for that possibility, even though the likelihood of that possibility is probably very low at the moment.
Jason, do we know if this is the same strain or variant of H5N1 that has visited us in the past? Excuse me.
That's I'm not the expert on this, so I don't want to go out on a limb. But what I certainly can say is that the conversations that my colleague is mentioning here, I mean, these are conversations that are starting among the public health community of exactly what steps might we need to be thinking about putting in place if we do need to tailor a vaccine and start scaling up production.
Well, that's exactly what I'm wondering. So Cheyenne, do you know whether or not, if we were to scale up production of vaccine, whether we've guessed the cocktail correctly that would be able to take on this particular H5N1?
Well, I think there's a very good chance that we can take it on, and this virus has actually been around for some period of time. It has not hit us in Canada to any extent in the past prior to December of 2021, but it's not as if we didn't know that the virus existed. So the virus has been around for some period of time, and we have a pretty good idea of the sort of vaccine candidates that we can use, both for poultry and also for humans. Now, the question is, are we really ready for producing vaccines to the level that is required? Have we looked at safety and efficacy of those vaccines? And the answer is not really. I think the reality is that we have a fantastic platform for production of seasonal flu vaccines, and many companies currently are doing that in Canada and also across the globe. So in terms of capacity is there, but they haven't really focused on pandemic influenza vaccines in Canada specifically. In the US, companies have done that historically, but not necessarily for this particular pandemic potential virus. Like I said, this is not a pandemic virus, but it's a pandemic potential virus that we need to look at. But first and foremost, we need to make sure that any vaccine platform that we use is going to be creating a safe and highly efficacious vaccine.
Jason, let me follow up by asking you about a pandemic virus. I note the World Health Organization has decided to extend the COVID-19 pandemic into its fourth year. What do you think the significance of that announcement was?
Well, I mean, I think in the simplest terms, it tells us that the pandemic's simply not over. And I think that, reading into that, we need to consider the fact that, of course, the virus is continuing to circulate. I suspect most of us know people who in the past weeks and months have contracted COVID for the first, second, or potentially third time. So, the virus continues to circulate. I mean, I can say that for us as a medical humanitarian organization that's working in 70 plus countries, we've seen significant disruption to routine health services and programs that are there to respond to other infectious diseases as well. And so for us, a message that the pandemic isn't over, also signals to us that, yes, of course, we need to continue to respond to COVID-19 and pay attention to that. But, it also signals that we need to be focusing our efforts in responding to the other health services that have been disrupted and, trying to close some of the gaps that have been created.
No, I take your point on that, but okay, let me follow up on this angle. The avian flu is not a global pandemic yet in the way that COVID-19 was or is. That's great. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the way that we approach other potential pandemics, such as this one, that you'd like us obviously to be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is obviously a bit more alive to the fact that there are pathogens with pandemic potential that are lurking. Some of those are viruses that we know of, and some of those are viruses that we probably don't. And I think that there's a few things that have come to light. One is that we do need a plan in place for preparing vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostic tests quickly when we need them. So even in the last couple of months, there have been outbreaks of other viruses that are deemed pathogens with pandemic potential. So I think the world is more alive to the fact that we need to be investing in these. What's missing, though, is a model for developing these tools, because we're essentially talking about preparing vaccines and therapeutics for these diseases and others for outbreaks that haven't really happened yet, or they happen, sporadically with small numbers of cases and so on. So it's really challenging to do something like incentivize the development of a vaccine by, a pharmaceutical company that typically is looking to recoup their investments and make profits when there's not a profitable market, so to speak, on the other side. So, when we're talking about preparing for future pandemics, I think, medical organizations and governments and so on are alive to the fact that we're going to have to invest in a slightly different way in developing and preparing the tools that we're going to need, so that we have candidates that are ready to go, that we can move into clinical trials and so on relatively quickly, so that we don't have a big gap if and when we have outbreaks of diseases that are of concern.
Professor Sharif, bit of an odd question here maybe. Climate change, how has that influenced or affected the development of some of these outbreaks that we're now experiencing?
Well, that's a fantastic question, Steve. We don't really have a huge amount of evidence, experimental evidence, but at least based on epidemiological evidence, it appears that climate change has had some impact on emergence of new viruses. And when I say new viruses, I don't really mean that de novo viruses all of a sudden being, created. I'm really talking about new strains of viruses, or viruses that existed, but now they're gaining more virulence, and as a result of that, they're becoming more pathogenic. And what I mean by pathogenic, it means that they cause disease, more severe disease, or cause disease in new species. So climate change, as an example, there are many different aspects and angles to this, but as an example, climate change can lead to the so-called spillover events, meaning that a virus or a pathogen can jump from one species to a new species. The old species is a species that was quite adapted to this virus. So the species might have harbored the virus, might have served as a reservoir for the virus, but didn't really succumb to clinical signs of disease. So as a result of that, we wouldn't really get alerted because of emergence of disease in that particular species. But now, because of climate change as one of the contributing factors, now that species has the opportunity to interact with a totally entirely new species. So as a result of that, there would be a lot of exposure to new viruses. And as a result of that, there is a possibility that these viruses could jump from one species to another species. And our concern is that at some point of time, they could also jump to humans. So as a result of that, climate change may indirectly or directly lead to emergence of new viruses, and viruses that are perhaps more virulent, or they can cause more disease for the new species that they interact with, or for humans that interact with those species.
Jason, we already have a pretty good list of reasons why climate change should be avoided, but I guess we can add this to the list, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, this is one of the things that we're paying attention to very closely in our own projects. And we're already seeing some of the implications and the impacts of climate change. So, a very common disease that we treat in our programs and in our medical projects is malaria. So malaria is a parasitic disease. It's, a leading cause of death, particularly in children in low-income countries. What we're seeing already is that as a result of climate change and a result of environmental degradation, we're seeing changing patterns in malaria seasons. So, a malaria season can be affected by rains, by droughts, by, anything that sort of changes the breeding ground and the overall population of mosquitoes. And so we're seeing malaria seasons that are more intense, that are slightly longer, that are coming at different times than what we would have anticipated. And so we're acutely aware of the fact that climate change is going to really challenge even some existing disease control programs that exist in the world, and then of course have the real potential, as my colleague was saying, to introduce new interactions between different animal species and sort of increase the potential for spillover events.
Well, to that end, let's bring it home here then in our last couple of minutes, and that is on Tuesday, Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kieran Moore, released his annual report, and here's something he had to say in the report. He said, history tells us that once an event like SARS, H1N1, or COVID-19 passes, complacency often sets in. Funding is redirected and readiness wanes. Yet the risk of serious disease outbreaks and another pandemic is real and growing. Population growth, land use practices, climate change, the growing international wildlife trade, and global travel are making it more likely. Professor Sharif, how do we ensure that policymakers don't get complacent and take their eye off the ball here?
That's a fantastic question, and I wish I had a fantastic answer for that, Steve. First and foremost, I think one of the issues that COVID-19 has really brought home is the fact that we cannot really act as silos. We need to have cross-cutting departments and organizations. For example, within the federal government, we cannot really look at any of these issues arising from pandemics or pandemic potential pathogens as, let's say, just a public health issue. It goes in a wide variety of different angles and aspects. And I think, as just one recommendation from someone, who doesn't really necessarily have a huge amount of understanding of how governments work, but I can tell you one thing that is for sure, and that is the fact that we need to have a much more holistic approach towards dealing with pathogens and dealing with pandemic potential viruses more specifically. And as a result of that, I think collaboration among various different organizations within the government would be of utmost importance. But that's just one aspect. I'm sure that there are many other aspects that my colleague Jason would be able to tackle much more eloquently, especially from the human health side of things.
I don't know about more eloquently, but I'm going to give him a shot at the question anyway. There is such a temptation once you've sort of turned the corner on something to just sort of let your guard down, and we got to be careful not to do that. How do we sort of remind everybody, the policymakers, not to do that?
Yeah, I think one of the other things is I agree with you, and I think one of the other things that we see in emergencies as well is that we respond to the emergency that's immediately in front of us, sure, right? And sometimes that comes to the neglect of other things that are still happening. And so I think one thing that all of us in the public health community right now are really concerned about is the fact that there is a large gap in vaccine coverage for diseases like measles, for example. We are seeing this in many of the places where we work. We know that around the world, there's about 23 million children who've missed immunizations during the pandemic. There's about 17 million children who didn't receive any immunizations at all during the pandemic. So one of the big consequences of that gap that we're seeing is large measles outbreaks. So last year in Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, there was an outbreak. There were about 148,000 cases of measles, about 1,800 deaths that occurred. Now that's a country with, it's affected by conflict. It has a weak health system and so on. Excellent public health professionals on the ground, but it's a challenging environment to vaccinate kids in. But we're also seeing measles outbreaks in other places where we work, such as Afghanistan and elsewhere. Now, that's not only a problem in low and middle income countries. I cited the global figure of 17 million children who've missed vaccines. Last week, the Ottawa Public Health issued a warning that vaccination coverage was dropping in Ottawa as well. So, this is a global phenomenon. I think it's in many ways a consequence of, us sort of focusing on COVID-19 and as you say, sort of taking our eye off the ball of some of the infectious diseases. I think that we are really concerned about the fact that there is this gap, not only for measles vaccination, but also for other vaccine preventable diseases like polio, yellow fever, meningitis, and so on. We know that there are gaps in immunization coverage for particularly children who are living in low-income countries, and we're really quite concerned that as a result of this gap, we're potentially going to see outbreaks of those diseases as well. So it's not just pathogens with pandemic potential. We really need the world and public health officials and governments and policymakers to be acutely aware of the fact that there are disease outbreaks that occur on a daily basis that don't attract the same level of response and engagement and investment in research and development, but that have real significant public health implications for people who are affected by them.
Let's hope they're watching. That's Jason Nickerson, Doctors Without Borders, Cheyenne Sharif, Professor, Acting Dean at the Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph. I want to thank both of you for coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your views. Many thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
In the depths of pandemic lockdowns and social distancing, many people, desperate for something good, sought out and adopted pets of all kinds. Now, those puppies and kittens are all grown up, and sadly, some are reportedly winding up far from being treasured family members. With us now for more, in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, Kathy Powelson, Executive Director of Paws for Hope Animal Foundation. And here in our studio, Phil Nichols. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the Toronto Humane Society, and Camille Labchuk, Executive Director of Animal Justice. And we are happy to have you two here in our studio. Phil, I don't think you've been here before. First time for you?
First time.
Great. Camille, good to see you again. And Kathy, thanks for joining us from the left coast. Phil, let's start with this. Rouge National Park in Toronto, very well-known place. It has apparently seen a threefold increase in abandoned animals in the park. We talk dogs, we're talking cats, we're talking rabbits, we're talking even apparently reptiles. Why is this happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening from what we've seen because of access to care, and shelters are running at capacity, right? Animal shelters across the country are experiencing high demand of animals being surrendered and brought in. A lot of them are having to turn people away. When they're being turned away, they're left without places to choose, and some of them are sadly just being abandoned outside in parks. And it's the ones we find are in parks. The question is how many are being abandoned outside of, well-trafficked areas by people that are not being found.
Camille, do you want to follow up on that? How much of people abandoning their pets in parks is going on right now?
Unfortunately, we're seeing a reported increase in this, and I think Phil is totally right. There's likely a lot more that we don't know about. We're really just scratching the surface with what we see. And, people, the reasons for this are obvious, but people are no longer at home as much as they used to be. People are facing financial crunches and making difficult decisions on that basis. And we failed to promote a responsible pet guardianship culture in this province, and failed to encourage people to think about having pets as part of their families and offering a life to those animals instead of buying animals just to fulfill a need that they have.
I'm going to follow up on that responsible guardianship angle in a little bit, but let me get Kathy in here right now and just give us your experience in Western Canada. Are you seeing the same things that we are here?
We certainly are seeing, as Phil mentioned, our shelters and rescues are full. We don't have any areas where we're seeing mass abandonments, but we know that this is happening for the reasons that Phil mentioned. Access to care and the shelters are full. We also are seeing an increase in people's individual experiences and them facing crises and needing sometimes just a temporary place for their pet to be, and there not being that option as well. And we and my colleagues in BC, when someone reaches out to us for help, if we're not able to assist them, unfortunately what's happening is there's nowhere for us to refer them to. And so, we don't know what's happening to these animals when we get off the phone and someone is in crisis and they're going to lose their housing. That's a big issue in BC right now. Lack of pet-friendly housing, lack of housing in general, lack of pet-friendly housing has created an absolute crisis. Our program provides temporary foster care for up to 6 months. And even that amount of time is not enough for some people to find safe and affordable housing where they can keep their pets.
Phil, do you do that at the Humane Society, this foster care for 6 months type of thing?
Yeah, we have an urgent care foster program for individuals experiencing temporary crisis. We tend to cap closer to about a year and 12 months, but similar, it still sometimes isn't enough, and that program's demand has been seeing a really skyrocketing rate of entrance requests over the last 2 years.
What generally is happening? I mean, I think we can speculate here, but you've seen this firsthand. What's happening in people's lives that would warrant them going to you and saying, I can't do it anymore, you've got to take my pet for X number of months?
There's a wide variety. We've been seeing an increase in housing instability issues and individuals coming in for that, but there's also domestic violence that animals will come in for through the program. But I would say those two pieces are pretty key. The housing instability has been causing quite a rise over the last couple months.
Camille, let's go back at this. Responsible guardianship as it relates to pets. What are you getting at there?
Yeah, I think in this province, we largely treat people's companion animals as their own problem, and we don't provide enough social support through public funding and other, public provincial mechanisms to support people in keeping their animals with them. I don't think you generally see people who want to give up animals and who feel good about that decision. I suspect a lot of abandonment has to do not only with inability to find a place for those animals to go, but also the social shame of feeling like a failure and being unable to keep that animal with you in your own home. But what we see in this province, Steve, is and across the country is largely governments treating these sheltering type issues as a private problem that charities should address, instead of providing public infrastructure and really strong supports to make sure that shelters have the capacity, that rescues have the capacity to deal with this question and this issue when people can't care for animals any longer.
So what does that look like? If in your best world, what does a more community-based approach look like?
Yeah, I think we do some public funding of some shelter operations, especially when you look at larger cities like Toronto. Toronto Animal Services receives funding for operating shelters. But most shelter and rescue operations are run on donations. They're run on volunteer power. They're run because people, out of the goodness of their hearts, believe it's the right thing to do to care for animals. And that, of course, is the case. But there's also a lot of social and public benefits that accrue from making sure that we have this public infrastructure to take in cats, dogs, rabbits, reptiles, other animals who need homes.
Reptiles?
Reptiles.
Like what?
Lizards, snakes, iguanas, these are all animals that unfortunately are still legal to keep and possess and own in most places in the country. And it's often a very challenging animal to care for. People don't typically understand or always understand the needs that those animals have. And sometimes that can lead them to want to give them up and abandon them, sadly.
Kathy, can you help me on that one? People have pet reptiles where you are, snakes, lizards, that kind of thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Camilla 100%. We advocate, that pets should be included in the social safety net. And so when we're looking at supporting families, we should be looking at supporting all members of the families, including the companion animals. And that would extend to providing funding to organizations that are supporting the animals. Because of the work that Pause for Hope does, we're often working with the same families that our colleagues in social services are supporting. We're just supporting their companion animals, and they're supporting the humans. But really, we need a system that is looking at animal welfare not only as a social service, but as a social justice issue. Because what we are seeing is families that are struggling are disproportionately marginalized and don't have access to human services in the same way that they are struggling with access to animal services.
In which case, Phil, what do you need?
There's a lot that's needed on that, I think, and we're lucky at this point that the Vet Act in Ontario is up for review and revision, because the entire model of how veterinary care and access to care is delivered in the province needs an overhaul. It's an antiquated and dated system, and it's preventing right now solutions that could make care more accessible to individuals and pets and families from existing. The last major review happened in the late 80s. And it's time to not only be caught up, but also to be forward-looking and evaluate the models that can make care accessible. We focus a lot on sheltering and reactionary programs, which are necessary because the preventative programming and the preventative services aren't there to support people before they hit their breaking point and before those animals end up without anywhere else to go.
I'm sure most people watching this don't understand the nuances of what you're trying to advance here right now, but is it a question of what? More storage, more care, more what?
I think it's more capacity within the industry. Care providers within the veterinary industry across the country, there's a national shortage. Right? There's not enough veterinarians, there's not enough veterinary technicians and other paraprofessionals to deliver the services to the volume of animals that exist in the country that need support. And the models of care delivery aren't sufficient enough to be accessible. So at Toronto Humane, we're taking a different approach to access to care and looking at alternative models of veterinary care services that can provide vaccinations and preventative wellness services and spays and neuters at rates that are more accessible and affordable for people that are experiencing challenges, in an effort to prevent people from hitting the breaking point where animals are needing to be surrendered to the shelter. There's a huge capacity issue just within the infrastructure to deliver care going on.
Camille, would an uptick in adoptions solve this?
I think that would certainly help, but we can't just look at adoptions and on the demand side of things for animals. We also have to look at the supply side of things for animals. So we know, Steve, that during the pandemic, everyone wanted a puppy, everyone wanted a cat. Shelters were empty, and enterprising people, backyard breeders, puppy mills, stepped in to fill that void by breeding animals at astronomical rates, selling them for astronomical prices to profit from people's desire for companionship during the pandemic. So in a sense, we sort of glutted the marketplace with animals who were being purchased and sold instead of being adopted. And some of those animals are now the ones who are being given up to shelters. That's why adoption is so important, and public infrastructure to encourage adoption is so important. But I think another piece of that puzzle is that we don't actually regulate dog breeding or cat breeding or any other animal breeding in most of this country.
I was going to ask you about that. Should there have been a crackdown during that puppy mill breeding situation?
Yeah, well, I think one of the concerns is what conditions were these animals being kept in so that so many baby cats and baby dogs could be pumped out at such a high volume to meet that demand. We know that puppy mills run untrammeled in so many places in this country, the same thing for kitten mills. And, in Ontario, for instance, and virtually everywhere else, The government doesn't even know who's breeding dogs because there's no requirement to get a license, there's no requirement to get an inspection, to be approved to start breeding dogs. And governments have no way of following up and checking to see what those conditions are like. And when puppy mills are busted because authorities maybe get a tip from the public, we often find just appalling conditions. Mother dogs kept for years in tiny cages in filthy, appalling situations with horrific injuries. We know oftentimes these dogs who are sold to the public come with health problems because of poor breeding practices and poor veterinary care. So I think it's something the governments really need to get a grasp on.
I well remember, at least I think I will remember, there's a guy who's on Toronto City Council right now named Mike Cole, but I think when he was a member of the Ontario legislature, he held a press conference at Queen's Park to crack down on puppy mills that were abusing animals, and he broke down in the middle of his press conference, overcome at the sadness of what he was seeing because he was so appalled at what he was seeing. This is a thing, isn't it?
It's a horrible thing. I've been present for those puppy mill busts, and you just see these dogs whose fur is matted, who reek of urine and feces, who've been confined in basements, in warehouses and sheds, and forced to breed for years and years. There's really no excuse for it, and I think a lot of provincial politicians have taken note of this issue before, but no government has ever stood up and said, we're going to regulate puppy breeding, we're going to regulate animal breeding and get control over this problem.
Kathy, is this an issue where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And recently, we have seen some more large-scale removals from our BCSPCA from breeders who ramped up their operations during the pandemic to try to meet this need. And now that the demand is gone, they are overcrowded with puppies, and so have turned to the SPCA to take these animals in. So, I mean, that is, typically are just a pandemic puppy, the definition of a pandemic puppy right there. And we had a government that had drafted legislation for breeding registrations, and it didn't move anywhere. And so, we were optimistic about 6 years ago, but again, there is no regulation. There's no regulations for rescues as well, and I think that is also very problematic. We saw at the beginning of the pandemic organizations that were mass importing van loads of puppies from the United States in almost equally horrific conditions as we see in some puppy mills. They were crammed in crates. They were adopted off in the midnight in parking lots. And then, many of these animals were sick. Some of them had to be euthanized because they should never have left the shelter. They were so ill. And then what we're seeing now is many of these animals that have come through have behavior and or health issues that their families are not prepared or able to deal with.
Let me just add this. Kathy, you do a blog, and one of the issues that you have raised in the blog is, and I must confess it's been going through my head while we've been having this conversation, and that is the tendency for us to be rather judgy of the people who give up their animals in the middle of this circumstance they find themselves in. Here's Kathy writing in her blog, if we reject the assumptions that people are, quote, giving up on their pets, and that unhoused or low-income people can't take care of their animals, then we can see the truth. That the real issues we should be focusing on are the lack of pet-friendly housing, poverty, domestic violence, illegal breeders and traffickers, access to veterinary care. That's Kathy on the record on that. Camille, why don't you pick up on that? It's easy to be judgy here. It's tougher to be compassionate. Why do we need more of the latter and less of the former?
It's always struck me as funny, and I could not agree more with Kathy's points. But so some people have great compassion for animals, but not for the humans who share their lives with those animals. And I think that's part of just being a well-rounded, compassionate, generous human being, is appreciating that people get into difficult circumstances, and it's not their fault that inequality is massive in this society and that they have to make those tough choices. Kathy made a really good point in her blog, which is the lack of pet-friendly accommodations and housing in this country. In Ontario, we are lucky in a sense because there actually are laws that say that you can include a no pets clause in a lease. Now, that doesn't prevent a landlord from discriminating against somebody who's got a dog at the outset and refusing to rent to them, but they can't kick them out ostensibly once they're in a rental unit. That doesn't exist anywhere in the rest of the country. And so you've got all these folks who share their lives with companion animals and are desperately seeking accommodation. And we know how difficult finding housing is for so many people, especially if they're low income. And then they face this added challenge of having animals that they want to continue living with who are parts of their family and being forced into this impossible situation of giving up those animals or living in their cars.
So do you think we need a law that prohibits landlords from tossing tenants if they have pets?
Absolutely. This is something that would be incredibly helpful in addressing the pet challenges that people face when they're looking for accommodation. There's ways to deal before anybody starts raising the alarm about what about landlords and their rights. There's ways to deal with tenants who cause problems, including with animals who cause problems. But that doesn't mean that people should be denied the chance of a place to live from the outset just because they live with a cat or a dog or a guinea pig or a rabbit.
Or a snake or a lizard?
Or a snake or a lizard. I mean, prefer that they don't adopt those pets in the first place, but if they have them, they should stay with their families.
I gotcha. Judginess over compassion. Where are you on that, Phil?
It's rampant in animal welfare. I mean, and we need compassion, and I agree with all the points made. The biggest issue with that is so long as we're focusing on judgment, we're not actually going to be looking at real-world solutions that can address the underlying problem and the root cause. And I think the sector has shown that. I mean, we spent decades working on the judgment and the reaction piece, and it hasn't resolved the problem. If we start meeting people where they're at and coming up with solutions that are actually going to address the underlying issue, we can prevent the problem from existing at the same degree that it does right now. And we're not going to do that so long as we're judging people, and we're sure not going to know how broad the problem is if they're not even willing to come to us because they're afraid of judgment.
Kathy, I take no joy in saying this, but certainly if you travel through downtown Toronto, and I imagine it's the same in Vancouver, you will see homeless people outdoors on very cold days, and as they have their blankets over them, they have their blankets over their dogs as well. There are many people who don't have a place to live, but who have big enough hearts to actually take care of their companions while they're in very precarious circumstances. You see that too, I assume?
Yeah, absolutely. And before COVID, we operated free animal health clinics. And so we would bring a team of veterinarians and vet technicians to homeless shelters and other service agencies, and we would do a free clinic. And, we did them for 8 years. And over the time, our veterinarians would say that the animals that they saw at these clinics were as healthy as the animals that they see in their private practice. And in fact, dogs that they see at these free clinics are generally more socialized than the dogs that they see in private practice, because the dogs are doing what dogs are meant to do, and that's roaming with their pack, right? And they're out and they're not sitting on a couch for 8 hours a day. They had healthier body weights because they were getting the exercise that they need. And one of the things that they saw more of was fleas and parasites, but those things are relatively easy to treat. And so the notion that homeless pets are suffering is not well supported. And also, again, people are concerned about the animal, but they're not concerned about the person. Like they're more worried about the fact that there's a dog sleeping homeless on the street than they are their person, which to me is very problematic, because behind every animal in need, there is a person in need as well. And we can't have a healthy community or healthy society until we have healthy people who can take care of their pets. And it's a very archaic approach to be focusing only on the animals. And even if you don't like people and your focus is on the animals, the most sustainable and effective approach is bettering the lives of human beings so that the companion animals have a better life as well. And we're not just in some sort of circle where we are just helping the animals, not helping the people. We'll never get out of this situation if we're not looking at this problem in a more holistic way.
I like the way you put that, because I think we all know people who don't like people, but they love pets plenty. And, okay, for the people watching or listening to this right now, tell them one thing they can do to help.
Support your local shelter, your Humane Society, support rescues. Also, if you yourself are thinking about bringing an animal into your family, please, please, please adopt and don't buy that animal from a breeder or from a puppy mill, and especially not from Kijiji, because that's almost certainly going to be from a puppy mill. I encourage people to think about what they can offer to an animal and what type of animal in what type of situation is compatible with their lifestyle. Are you a busy family that's always on the go and might do better with a cat rather than a dog? That's the type of thing that rescues and shelters can advise you on. They can look at your situation and say, look, we have this adoptable animal who's going to fit in really well with your family. And that's the type of thing that makes sure that that adoption is going to be sustainable in the long term, instead of just a fleeting, thing where somebody buys a puppy for a Christmas or a birthday present or a chick for Easter, which is never good.
Gotcha. I want to thank Kathy Pallison for being out there in British Columbia for us on our program tonight, Phil Nichols from the Toronto Humane Society, and Camille Labchuk, Executive Director of Animal Justice. Great to have all three of you on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elon Musk paid about 44 billion US dollars to buy Twitter. Whatever else people think about that, many questioned whether it was a good investment. Erin Kelly is the CEO of Advanced Symbolics Inc., the keeper of the artificial intelligence known as Polly, and she joins us now on why she thinks it was likely worth every penny and more. And I have to confess, I don't hear many people saying that, so I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. First of all, welcome. We normally do this on the line from Ottawa. So
yeah, it's great to be here in person.
Good to have you here in the Big Smoke. $44 billion. What's he actually getting for that?
So just a little bit of background on Elon Musk. We know he owns Tesla. We know he owns SpaceX. He also is one of the main people in OpenAI. And as people probably know, OpenAI are the people behind ChatGPT, which everybody has tried, I hope, and its older sibling, DALL-E. Now, those are AIs, and I think that
which you're into as well, obviously.
Right, and so and I want to say right off the top, I don't have any inside knowledge on Twitter or why Elon Musk bought Twitter, but these are my views based on somebody who comes from the industry and understands the value of data to AI.
Okay. In which case, what did he get for $44 billion?
So what he got was a huge treasure trove of data. So if you look at DALL-E and ChatGPT, what do they need to do their magic? They need to train on data. So DALL-E trained on images, all the great artists, clip art, all of that kind of thing. Now, there are several lawsuits going on against OpenAI because of the training data. So people who say that OpenAI used my images in order to create the great art that it does. And just to explain, this is original art, so it's not, it's not under copyright. It's considered original because the AI is creating it from scratch. And it trained on other people's art in order to do that, but it doesn't recreate their art. So right now, it's a real legal kind of gray zone as to will these lawsuits shut down AI or cause you to have to compensate thousands of artists that you've trained on? But what if you own all the data? What if you own the platforms that the AI is training on?
What could you do with that data?
Well, first of all, when you look at Twitter, Twitter is perfect for AI training because of the short text. So, when we look at natural language processing, what the AI is trying to do is understand the context of words within the sentence. And when the sentences are short, it's a lot easier to do that. So it's a great training ground for AI. It's also got all of this historical data. So you want to know what people thought of Bill C-18. You can say, well, the agenda said this, and Pablo Rodriguez said that, and Senator Harder said this, and you can put it all together and create a good essay on it. So you have different people's perspectives. You have the history of the last 10 years, every celebrity. So you've got the history, you've got the rights to train it. Nobody can argue that it's not your data. So to me, and think of this, maybe you can stop other people from getting the data. because you own it. So we look at, for example, Bill C-18. It says that if you link to news sites, you've got to compensate them. Well, how many journalists link to Twitter or pull Twitter into their stories?
All of them.
So do you have to? Are you going to have to compensate for that? I mean, he's looking to monetize this platform. To me, this is gold. Everybody now wants to have a ChatGPT-like AI. Where are they going to train that AI?
You have ascribed to him a strategy and a mission here that I suspect a lot of people hadn't considered, because he's so different, right? He's such an odd billionaire that most people thought this was just an ego trip for him because he liked to be on Twitter and put out a bunch of crazy tweets from time to time. But if I hear you right, there's actually some method to this madness.
I think it's a very smart move, and there might be advantage to him not being forthright about it. You know what I mean? When you're in business, you have a strategy. You don't necessarily want everybody to know the strategy. So saying that I'm doing this for free speech, or I'm doing this to bring Trump back, or I'm doing, for all these crazy reasons, very distracting. And I don't know that that's the reason, but it strikes me as why is everybody sort of focusing on the salacious part of it and not seeing the gold here? The gold is the data.
Because that's what media do. They focus on the salacious. How did you, it's interesting, you obviously saw some dots and you connected the dots in the way that you did. How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, because I'm a strategist as well. And so as I was looking at what are the implications of Elon Musk buying Twitter and him wanting to monetize it, obviously we use that data as well. Now, there's some advantage in the way we have built our AI that no matter what he does with it to try and monetize it, we will benefit more than others. And so in connecting those dots, I thought, ooh, this is going to be tough on this industry because depending on what he chooses to do with it. Now, historically, he's been, like OpenAI, as the name suggests, is there to bring AI to the masses. So historically, he's not been a walled garden type of person, but he definitely holds all the power in the data kingdom. And I know this because we use AI, we use it on different platforms, right? We use it on Reddit, we use it on TikTok, we use it on all those. And I know the value of the Twitter data because it is much easier for the AI to digest, if you will, than those other platforms.
And one of the things that you have done with Polly, which is the nickname for your AI, is that you have used that Twitter data to help you divine where the public is right now, what they're thinking about, maybe potentially translating it into how elections are going to turn out, that kind of thing. But I presume at the moment you're using all that data free of charge. What if you have to pay for it at some point?
Well, that's the brilliance of sampling the data properly. So our competitors are using what's called the Twitter fire hose. They're pulling everything down. Now, that has got two disadvantages. One, you're not properly sampling the data, so you can't do proper stats with it. But the other disadvantage, and the reason we originally did this, was it's very expensive. You just do 10,000 tweets, it costs you a fortune. You have to pay for all that data. If you're properly sampling it, you can sample a lot less. And so, yes, it'll affect us, but it won't affect us as much as our competitors, and that's why we're kind of okay with it, wherever way it goes, I guess you could say.
Got it. Let's talk more money here. Many foreign investors played a part in Musk's Twitter takeover, and according to the deal, apparently anyone who invested $250 million or more gets access to confidential company information. Want to play that out for us? What does that look like?
I don't know, because it's confidential. But
in terms of competitiveness or your place in the market?
It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. It's the data. So, we touched a little bit on what can Polly do with this data. And Polly doesn't have access to anything other than what you see on Twitter. She just do it on a massive scale. But if you had more data, what more could you do in terms of forecasting, in terms of predicting
what
things?
More could you do?
A lot.
Really?
Yes. And I think that's what people are missing. This is a gold mine of data. And, ChatGPT goes till 2021. With Twitter, it can go beyond. And so it's filling that pipe. And we've all seen how amazed people were with ChatGPT. That's just the beginning. This is version 3 of ChatGPT. I mean, it's going to get a lot more powerful. And even when you look at our Bill C-18, it's behind the times already because of ChatGPT. We don't no longer have links. It's going to summarize all the stuff for you. So it's an extremely powerful and rich data set.
Can you characterize or qualify the richness of the data? When you say that, what do you mean?
The main, so in order to do predictive work, which is what the real goal is to me anyway, you need lots of data. Anything else is anecdotal, right?
And data meaning what? What specifically?
People's intentions, and so and when you're looking for trends, you don't want to just say one 40-year-old said this. Oh, that's a trend. You have to, if you can properly sample it, then you can say this is a real trend because I'm seeing it beyond different social bubbles. Because that's what we do as well. You don't want to be listening to one social bubble. You want to get across different social bubbles. New products, are they going to take off or not? I can even show you with data right now when a conspiracy theory, for example, is going mainstream and when it's not, when you should take action on something, predictive messaging, how to say things in such a way that a particular audience will be more receptive to it or not. I mean, there is so much you can do with a treasure trove of data like that I think most people are missing the value of this purchase.
Gotcha. Does this development create, in your judgment, any ethical concerns we ought to be aware of?
So far, no, because there's been no, it's been business as usual from a access to the information point of view. I think there's a lot, though. There's a lot that's unknown in this space. As I mentioned, there's lawsuits that are going through now. Is this my copyrighted material? If you put things on a platform and then it's used for people to make money with, is that your information? Is it the platform's information? Is it depend on what you do with the information? I mean, there's a lot. Back when we did copyright, it was, well, I made this picture, I made this piece of art, so it's pretty clear. But now it's, no, an AI made it, but based on, I can say, make me a painting with Steve Paikin wearing a Sens jersey and put it in the
that will
in
never
the theme
happen.
Of
That will. Okay, this interview's over. Thank you very much.
No.
Let me ask you about Elon himself, because he did put this tweet out, I guess it was several weeks back, asking Twitter users to vote on whether or not he ought to continue as CEO of the company, having taken it over. And the majority apparently said you should step down. And I gather he's deciding whether or not he actually wants to yield to the will of the majority here. But if there were a change of leadership at Twitter, would that affect any of what you're talking about right now?
No, because he still owns it. I mean, it's the ownership that I think matters. So far, there's nothing anti-competitive that's taken place. But I'm just saying it's a treasure trove of data for the person who owns it.
Right. Aaron, good to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Great, thank
That's
you.
Aaron Kelly, the CEO of Advanced Symbolics, Inc. And that is the agenda for Thursday, March the 9th, 2023. Tomorrow, we're the 1990s, Britain's coolest decade. Writer Dylan Jones makes that case to Nam Kiwanuka. Also, actor and playwright Cliff Cardinal tells us about his new show and its very unorthodox take on land acknowledgements. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at TVO.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.